The final film of Phase 5 of the MCU, Thunderbolts, has dropped in theaters. So today I'm going to rank every PG-13 post-Endgame MCU film from worst to best. The only one not on this list is Deadpool and Wolverine because of the R rating. With that in mind, let's get started. Number 13, last place, Multiverse of Madness. An occultishly dark, graphically violent, overly long film. When I go to an MCU movie, I'm expecting a fair bit of lightheartedness, but the majority of the film is just darkly occult, and this is coming from somebody who enjoys Harry Potter. But I just left the movie with a very dark feeling. It felt violent for shock value and for the sake of being violent, as opposed to being done tastefully. And on top of that, they ruined Scarlet Witch by making her irredeemably evil. The minute you try to murder a child, to me, that's the worst thing you can do, and shame on you, Marvel, for taking your character in that direction. Number 12, Eternals. I will acknowledge the film itself looks gorgeous, it's got great cinematography, but the story and most of the characters are boring, and the film is melodramatic. It tries to have all these ideas about divine intervention, letting bad things happen, but it all comes off as very pretentious. The film, for some reason, is also told out of order, where we jump ahead to characters' deaths, but then one scene later we see them again. I acknowledge the ambition, but the execution is incredibly dull. Number 11, Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. I appreciate the way the film pays tribute to the late Chadwick Boseman and deals with themes of grief. Out of the Phase 4 movies, this feels the most human, it feels the most personal. When the film isn't honoring Chadwick Boseman, it just gives us too many plot lines. Besides the main plot line about Shuri dealing with the loss of her brother, there's also the plot line about Riri Williams, who, much like American Chavez from Multiverse of Madness, doesn't feel like a character, but rather a plot device. Her last name might as well be MacGuffin, and by having her build an iron suit, it kind of negates Tony's sacrifice. What made Tony special was that he didn't have powers, but he was a tech genius. And he was such a tech genius that he's the only one able to build these suits. When anybody else tries to build them, they're just cruder versions. Obadiah Stane in the first film just takes the leftover scrap from the suit Tony built to escape captivity and doesn't really know how to use it. When Justin Hammer tries it, the test pilots all get seriously injured. And again, they're just cheaper knockoffs. Spider-Man suits that he built himself aren't fancy. They're just a hoodie and goggles. All its fancier tech comes from Tony later. And sure, in Far From Home, he builds himself a tech suit, but he does so with Tony's technology and after having been mentored by Tony for a few years. So much so that Tony leaves Peter in AI so he can continue his legacy. So really, Tony's the only one who can build these things. But now the film expects us to buy into the idea that a teenage girl who, as far as we know, has never met Tony Stark in her life, can build her own iron suit. Making a machine to detect vibranium, I can buy into, but being able to build a fully fledged iron suit is where it doesn't make sense. I get that she's smarter than average, but if anybody can build these things now, you take away what made Tony Stark unique. To quote Syndrome, when everyone's super, nobody is. And then there's the thin plotline about Martin Freeman's character that I just don't care about. And because the film is so somber and is dealing with some very serious themes, when there is humor, it feels unnatural, awkward, and inappropriately timed. The film has a lot of emotion, but it's overstuffed. Number 10, Quantumania. Now, I really enjoyed this movie. I thought the quantum realm was creative. I thought Catherine Newton worked well with Paul Rudd, but in terms of the tone, it's definitely the most serious of the three Ant-Man films. There is still some humor, but not nearly as much as its predecessors, so it's kind of an odd tone shift. Michael Pena and the other comic relief from the previous two films aren't in this one, even as cameos, which is a little disappointing. And Bill Murray, I think, was a bit wasted in this film. They didn't really give him a lot to do. However, the film still has big grand spectacle, whereas the other two films were relatively small scale. It was still entertaining, but definitely had a very different tone than the other two films. Number 9, The Marvels. The first Captain Marvel movie I found pretty lackluster, trying to be sort of a knockoff of Guardians of the Galaxy. This one, in terms of the tone, feels like its own thing. It feels less derivative of Guardians of the Galaxy and more like something else. Even some of the shots in this movie are stylized like a comic book. And that's what I got. A fun comic book movie. It has scenes in it that I found wildly creative. There's a part where they go to an alien planet and the aliens they meet are pretty fun. The filmmakers took what worked about the first one and expanded on it. Everyone loves Goose the cat, so now we get tons of her offspring. And what they do with these adorable but deadly kittens was one of the funniest scenes in the whole movie. In the first movie, I found Carol to be a pretty bland character, but here it actually feels like she has character flaws, and overall is better written. But the performance that absolutely steals the whole movie is Iman Vellani as Ms. Marvel. Do you love the infectious energy of Tom Holland's Spider-Man when he meets his heroes? Imagine a whole movie of that. The actor seems genuinely excited to be in the movie, and she is a delight. But there are certain issues. For one, the movie does require homework. If you haven't seen the WandaVision or Ms. Marvel series, you're going to be lost. The other issue is the villain is pretty forgettable. Remember Ronan from Guardians of the Galaxy? Yeah, hardly anybody does. This villain is basically the girl version of Ronan, and she's just as forgettable. But the majority of the movie, I had a massive grin on my face. It wasn't afraid to have fun, have some good humor, and well stylized action scenes. Number 8, Shang-Chi. This film, in the best way, breaks the traditional MCU formula. It's very much, for the most part, a standalone film. There are a few references connected to previous entries, but overall it stands on its own. The action is well choreographed and the characters are likable. The film harkens back to that phase in the 90s where we got martial arts movies like Ninja Turtles, Street Fighter, and Double Dragon, while not being as cheesy as those movies. The second half goes in a wild and crazy direction and is extremely creative. There are parts of it that reminded me of Pacific Rim, Godzilla, and Avatar: The Last Airbender. Aquafina is the performance that holds the film back a bit, though. She's annoying and unfunny. None of her jokes really land, and her humor feels forced. Number 7, Thor: Love and Thunder. I went into this with low expectations, especially after the missing trailers and the return of Natalie Portman, which felt forced at first. But I was pleasantly surprised. The movie is definitely a solo Thor story, and Jane's transformation into Thor actually made sense and gave her a compelling arc. I even found myself caring about her relationship with Thor for the first time. Christian Bale absolutely stole the show as the villain, easily the best of the Thor movies. While most of the humor worked, a few jokes like the screaming goats and their psycho play gag didn't land, and some of the lines felt either too cringy or too dark. Still, with strong characters and a surprisingly emotional story, I ended up really enjoying it. Number 6, Spider-Man: Far From Home. The film's biggest problem is that the movie is essentially Spider-Man cleaning up Tony's messes, even posthumously, so he's not really given a chance to be his own character until almost the end of the film. I think Jake Gyllenhaal was well cast as Mysterio, but his motivations, just like half the villains in the MCU, are a hatred for Tony Stark. Peter doesn't even get his own villain to fight, he gets Iron Man's leftovers. A lot of the humor in the film also feels needlessly crass, considering Spider-Man is still a teenager in this film, so a lot of the raunchier jokes come off as really ewy. And I don't think Zendaya has any chemistry with Peter, so to have a big part of the film revolve around Peter trying to confess his love for her just doesn't work for me, since I don't care about them as a couple. It's still a fun movie, but it's held back by his need to not let Tony Stark go. Number 5, Captain America: Brave New World. So when this movie was first announced, I was very pessimistic. They announced this movie right after the finale of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which was a show I was more negative on, and they announced the director is the same as Cloverfield Paradox, which, as a standalone movie not connected to Cloverfield, is watchable, but as a Cloverfield movie is not good. There were all these reports about reshoots and delaying the film after negative test screenings, and I think this is an example of where delaying the film actually helped it. Rogue One had reshoots, and even people who don't like a lot of the Disney Star Wars projects really like that movie. I was pleasantly surprised by how much I liked it. One of my main problems with the Falcon series was that Ronan was very cocky and arrogant, but here he isn't like that. He's actually likable, and his issue in this movie is how he's going to lead a new Avengers team, and dealing with the weight and burden of that, and it's done really well. The action sequences in this movie really stand out. If you're a fan of some of the more street-level, grounded MCU projects like Daredevil or the Hawkeye series, it's very much in line with that. Much like the Russo brothers' Captain America films, this feels like a political action thriller first, and a comic book movie second, and that's a good thing. In a time where a lot of the MCU is starting to feel very assembly line and micromanaged, this is a movie that still has its own identity. Even if you're not a comic book fan, you can enjoy the film if you're a fan of Mission Impossible, Jack Ryan, those kind of movies. It takes things like MK Ultra and puts it in a comic book world. It doesn't even really start to feel like a comic book movie until the last 15 or 20 minutes. The plot is pretty intriguing. Harrison Ford is a stand-up performance, and I do kind of joke that this is in essence sort of a sequel to Air Force One. Giancarlo Esposito is a great villain in this. The film has a bit of a darker tone than some of the other MCU projects. I'd say this is the darkest Captain America movie yet, but it's not the level of dark that goes too far, such as Doctor Strange 2 or Agatha. It still has enough lightheartedness that stops it from feeling nihilistic. Now, the original title for this movie was New World Order, but they changed it to Brave New World because apparently the New World Order title made people uncomfortable, and I just ask why. New World Order would have been a better title because it's referring to the plan of the villains. Now, what does hold it back is unfortunately it does require homework. You need to have seen the 2008 Hulk movie, all the other Captain America movies, Avengers: Infinity War, Endgame, and Eternals. Other than it feeling a bit too weighted by previous projects, it's still fantastic. Number 4, Thunderbolts. This is one of the most human MCU films to date. While the franchise has long relied on quippy humor, sometimes to its detriment, Thunderbolts wisely dials it back. The humor that is present lands well and feels organic, never undercutting the emotional weight of the scenes. The cast absolutely sells it. Everyone has solid chemistry, and their performances add depth to characters that have often been sidelined or underserved in other MCU projects. The action is visceral and tightly choreographed, keeping things street level and gritty for much of the runtime. That grounded quality is part of what makes the first two acts so compelling. Unfortunately, that focus and restraint don't carry through to the third act. The film takes a hard turn into overblown spectacle. Introducing a villain feels wildly out of place, like dropping Thanos in the final episode of Daredevil. The tonal whiplash is jarring. The first two-thirds of the movie are small-scale and personal, and then suddenly it's world-ending stakes with a dark Superman figure who's neither fresh nor compelling. It's a trope that has been run into the ground by now, and here it feels lazy rather than meaningful. It's a shame because the rest of the movie is so strong. This mismatch between setup and payoff echoes a pattern we've seen in some Marvel Disney Plus shows. Solid build-up, followed by a finale that buckles under the weight of too much plot too fast. Honestly, Thunderbolts might have worked better as a Disney Plus series, whereas characters and conflicts could breathe more and build naturally towards a climax that matches the grounded tone. Despite its third act missteps, Thunderbolts is still a standout in the modern MCU landscape. It's mature, emotional, and refreshingly light on jokes. If not for the disappointing villain, this could have ranked among the MCU's very best. Number 3, Guardians of the Galaxy 3. The stakes for this movie are incredibly high, the characters all get satisfying arcs, and they all work extremely well off each other. And unlike a lot of MCU sequels that forgot what the previous film set up and isn't followed through with, such as Baron Mordo and Doctor Strange, everything set up in the previous films comes back and feels important. The stakes of the plot revolve around Rocket. And unlike a movie like Black Panther Wakanda Forever, where characters like Riri Williams felt more like plot devices rather than actual characters, Rocket is an actual character in this film, not a MacGuffin. The way each character's arc ends is incredibly satisfying. Out of the 3 Guardians films, this is definitely the one with the most heart. I'd say it's almost perfect, but unfortunately what does hold it back is a pattern I'm noticing with these films. Sometimes they are afraid to show too much negative emotion. There are some very dark moments in this film, and sometimes instead of letting the audience feel the weight, they try to lighten things up with jokes that can feel a bit ill-timed. I know you want to lighten the tension, but sometimes it's more effective to let the audience feel something else. Another element that holds it back a bit is something that bogs down a lot of the MCU projects. They expect you to have watched everything with these characters. If you go into the movie not having watched Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special, you're going to be a bit confused by the beginning. There are certain characters and plotlines from that special that come back and are important, but if you haven't watched it or watched it recently, you're going to be a bit confused. However, apart from needing to watch the holiday special, this is a film that feels very focused on its own narrative. It isn't trying to set up the next 10 movies and shows. It feels like it stands on its own story. What they do with certain characters implies they could bring them back if they want to, but it doesn't feel like a priority. This feels like a movie made by a filmmaker and not by a studio. It doesn't feel like it's been marketed by studio notes. It feels like a movie that was made the way the director wanted to make it and not trying to work around 10,000 studio notes. It's an incredibly satisfying emotional end to the Guardians trilogy. Number 2, Black Widow. This, in my opinion, is how Brad Bird should have done Incredibles 2. Incredibles 2 to me was disappointing because instead of expanding on the ideas from the first film and having a movie about a crime-fighting family, it instead became an Elastigirl movie, with a long Jack Jack short thrown in as filler to an already thin movie. This is what I was hoping Incredibles 2 was going to be. Even though Brad Bird was not involved in this film, it feels like a lot of influence was taken from him because this film was like a combination of the first Incredibles movie and Brad Bird's Mission Impossible movie. The actors all have a very strong dynamic. The villain is one of the most despicable non-superpowered MCU villains, right up there for me with Robert Redford's character of Winter Soldier. The action is well choreographed, the plot is intriguing, and even when the film slows down, the dialogue is also compelling and keeps you invested. And number 1 is Spider-Man No Way Home. Now, some of you are probably thinking that I'm just blinded by nostalgia and I don't like it because of the novelty. While it is partially true, nostalgia aside, this film works because of its characters and how their arcs are resolved. Toby's Spidey gets to be the cool older mentor of the other 2 Spideys. Garfield's Spidey finally gets closure over Gwen's death. And by the end of the film, Tom Holland's Spidey has grown as a character the most than he has in any other films. The other 2 films he was thought of as the successor to Stark. But by the end of this film, he is his own man. He gets a fresh reset. He gets a chance to be the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man he always wanted to be. He's learned how to control his anger and grief, and how to be responsible with his powers. For some, this may be nothing more than a novelty film, but for me, I think it's a film that brings one of the best closures to a character in the MCU, so it comes in at number 1. So go ahead and share your ranking of the post-Endgame MCU films. You can include Deadpool, Wolverine, and yours if you want to. I just didn't. And I will see you next time.